About 20 years ago, I prepared a sermon for pastors about preaching about divorce. A lot has changed in the last 20 years, and unfortunately, not all good news. I have Alexander and Isabella that's going to review that sermon, and then at the end, I will give some updates. So here we go with Alexander and Isabella.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we distill complex information into actionable insights. I'm Alexander.
And I'm Isabella. We're part of the AI team here at 60 Seconds to Enrich LLC.
And today, we're tackling a subject that, well, you don't often hear discussed right from the pulpit.
That's right. We're diving into a sermon by Ken Schaefer. It confronts divorce among Christians, but also that really challenging situation when a Christian is married to a non-Christian.
Yeah, it's quite a sermon. Schaefer goes through what he sees as the key Bible passages, and he offers his interpretation plus some, let's say, very direct advice.
It really is a fascinating look at applying scripture to these messy, real-world situations many people face.
Definitely.
So our mission today is to unpack Schaefer's thinking. And, what's really striking right off the bat is his take on modern divorce trends.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, since he gave this sermon, divorce rates have actually gone down somewhat, but he suggests this isn't necessarily, purely good news.
Huh. That is counterintuitive. A lower divorce rate sounds like a positive thing on the surface.
It does, right? But Schaefer doesn't see it purely that way. He sees it more as a symptom of bigger shifts in society regarding relationships and commitment.
Okay, so what's his reasoning then? Why the concern?
He lays out a few key things. First, he points out that couples are marrying later in life now.
Right, that's a definite trend.
And while that might mean more maturity sometimes, he notes it often impacts fertility, decisions about having kids. Sometimes couples just don't have children at all.
Which, yeah, fundamentally changes the dynamic of marriage and family life, especially if kids were hoped for.
Exactly. Then, secondly, he talks about couples living together before marriage, kind of as a first step.
Cohabitation, yeah. Very common now.
Right. But Schaefer suggests that because it often involves less total upfront commitment, it can actually weaken the relationship's foundation. It might make it less likely to last, even if they do get married later.
So the trial run might actually undermine the commitment itself. That's his argument.
That's his perspective, yeah. And related to that, some couples just skip marriage altogether and decide to live together indefinitely. For Schaefer, these trends aren't really signs of stronger relationships. He sees it more as a redefinition of commitment itself, which he finds, troubling.
So these big societal shifts are reshaping the whole landscape for everyone, really.
Pretty much. Yeah. Affecting family structures, social norms, everything.
Okay, so beyond these stats and trends, what drove Schaefer personally to preach on such a, sensitive topic like divorce?
It's interesting. He draws deep inspiration from Ezra, the biblical figure.
Ezra, okay.
Yeah, in Ezra chapter 9, there's this really powerful scene where Ezra is just overcome with grief because the Israelites had been intermarrying with non-believers. He tears his clothes, pulls his hair out, sits there completely appalled.
Wow, that's intense imagery.
It is. And Schaefer sees this as a model. A pastor's deep love for God sometimes requires confronting the congregation, even when it's painful, about their behavior.
So it's about having that level of conviction and grief. Does Schaefer feel he needs to reach that point himself?
Well, he reflects on it. He says he's saddened by the state of marriage as he sees, but admits he hasn't quite reached Ezra's level of, tears and hair-pulling grief.
Okay.
But he implies that without that deep personal pain over sin, it's maybe hard to preach with the necessary force. And then he drops some pretty startling statistics that really fueled his concern.
Like what?
He mentions a 1990 census report from Orange County showing Christian marriages had a 60% divorce rate back then. 60%.
Whoa, that's high.
Yeah.
Especially for the time.
Right. And even more recently, he says reports indicate Christian marriages might actually have a higher divorce rate than non-Christian ones.
That's really shocking. It completely goes against the common assumption, doesn't it, that faith protects marriage?
It does. And Schaeffer uses this as evidence that just being a Christian doesn't automatically translate to different marital behavior. He even gives uncomfortable examples of pastors, church staff, elders involved in affairs or divorce. Which leads him to ask this really pointed question to other preachers. Are they partly responsible if they aren't actively preaching about preserving marriage from the pulpit?
A challenging question for church leaders.
Definitely. He pulls from 2 Timothy chapter 4, arguing pastors are charged to preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, to reprove, rebuke, exhort. He sees it as a core duty.
Not just an optional topic.
Not at all. And he highlights that warning in the same passage. The time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. Wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires.
And will turn away their ears from the truth. Yeah, I know the passage.
Exactly. He implies that's maybe why some tough topics get avoided. People want feel-good messages.
So what's the core truth Schaeffer believes needs to be preached, even if it makes people uncomfortable?
It's pretty blunt. Divorce and adultery are sin, period.
No hedging.
No. And the challenge, he says, isn't just that people don't know adultery is sin, most probably do, but maybe they've compromised on how serious a sin is.
Okay.
And even more crucially, he thinks many Christians don't actually know that divorce between two Christians is considered sin unless adultery was involved. That specific point.
That's a big knowledge gap he's pointing out within the church itself.
Huge, especially when you contrast it with, the messages out there in the world. Schaeffer points out that media, sometimes even friends, can make adultery or divorce seem okay, maybe even highly desirable.
Right, as acceptable solutions or paths to happiness.
So he insists pastors have to grieve over this, preach marriage preservation actively, maybe even quarterly. He suggests just to counteract those messages.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics then. How does Schaeffer interpret the Bible regarding divorce, specifically within Christian marriages?
He focuses heavily on 1 Corinthians 7, verses 10 and 11. For Christians married to Christians, the instruction Paul gives is pretty clear. The wife should not leave her husband. But if she does leave, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband.
Okay, remain single or reconcile.
And that the husband should not divorce his wife.
So Schaeffer's stance is really firm on this. Christian spouses should simply not divorce, barring very specific exceptions like infidelity, which comes up later.
Exactly. His baseline is, don't do it.
But, what about marital problems? Conflict happens, right? What's his guidance there?
Yeah, and this is interesting. Schaeffer frames most problems within Christian marriages as primarily a spiritual problem.
Spiritual? How so?
His reasoning is, if each spouse truly sought to put the other's needs first, that sacrificial, unconditional, agape love he talks about, most problems would actually get resolved. He believes this love is accessible through the Holy Spirit for believers.
So the solution lies in spiritual commitment and selflessness, basically. I guess that analogy too, right? The three-legged race.
Yeah, I like that one. Working out a Christian marriage is like having one leg tied to your partner's. To move forward, someone has to adjust their pace. You can't just run your own race. It takes teamwork, constant adjustment.
It's a good picture of interdependence.
Definitely. Now, he does address a really difficult issue of abuse.
Okay, how does he handle that?
He suggests that in cases of abuse, the spouse being abused should leave at least temporarily for their safety.
Right, safety first.
But importantly, he says they should not divorce. His proposed path involves Christian counseling to equip the abusive spouse with tools for change, aiming for eventual reconciliation and return home.
That's a very challenging position, especially for the victim. It seemed to put a lot of emphasis on the potential for the abuser to change while the victim waits, potentially in limbo or danger. Does he elaborate on the practicalities or timelines?
His primary focus in the sermon remains on the biblical command, as he sees it, not to divorce, and the potential for God to bring about change and restoration through faith and counseling. He doesn't delve deeply into the victim's practical challenges during that separation period, other than saying they should leave temporarily. The emphasis is firmly on the permanence of the marriage bond.
Okay, so that covers Christian marriages. What about the unequally yoked situation, a Christian married to a non-Christian? That adds another layer of complexity.
It really does. And here he turns again to 1 Corinthians 7, specifically verses 12 through 16. He's careful to point out this is Paul giving advice, applying theology to a situation not explicitly covered before, often arising when someone converted after getting married.
Right, so one spouse becomes Christian, the other doesn't.
Exactly, and Paul's instruction is key. If the unbelieving spouse consents to live with the Christian must not divorce them.
Okay. Stay together if the non-Christian wants to.
Yes. And Paul adds that the unbelieving spouse is sanctified through the believer, and their children are considered holy. It's a protective influence.
Interesting. But what if the non-Christian doesn't consent to stay?
That's the crucial flip side. Verse 15, if the unbelieving one leaves, let him leave. Paul says, the brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace.
Not under bondage.
Yeah.
That sounds significant. So let's just break down Schaeffer's advice here for clarity. If the non-Christian spouse wants to stay married.
The Christian must stay married, no initiating divorce.
Okay, but if the non-Christian spouse wants a divorce.
The Christian should allow it. Let them leave, as Paul says. God has called us to peace.
And under no circumstances should the Christian be the one to suggest or push for divorce from the non-Christian spouse.
Correct. That's Schaeffer's interpretation. He also stresses that the one flesh reality of marriage doesn't require both partners to be Christians. This passage wasn't justifying Christians choosing to marry non-believers, he advises against that, but addressing situations where conversion happened within an existing marriage.
Right, a crucial distinction. Okay, now for what you called one of the hardest questions Schaeffer addresses, remarriage. Specifically, can a Christian remarry if their non-Christian spouse divorces them?
Yeah, you can tell this weighs heavily. Schaeffer walks through his reasoning very carefully. He looks again at that phrase, not under bondage, in 1 Corinthians 7.15.
The phrase used when the unbeliever leaves.
Right, and he compares it to verse 39 of the same chapter, which says, a widow is free to be married to whom she wishes only in the Lord because her husband is dead, meaning the marriage bond is broken.
Okay, so he's comparing not under bondage with the freedom granted by death.
Exactly. And he brings in the IVP Bible background commentary, a respected resource, which interprets not under bondage in this context as meaning the believer is essentially free to marry any man, implying the marriage bond is dissolved when the unbeliever initiates the departure and divorce.
So his inference is non-Christian divorce is Christian divorce. Christian is free to remarry. But then there's Jesus' teaching in Matthew 19.9, isn't there? About divorcing and remarrying being adultery.
Right, the big caveat. Jesus says, whoever divorces his wife except for immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. Schaeffer views that immorality or marital unfaithfulness as the specific exception Jesus gives regarding the judgment of adultery upon remarriage.
So how does Schaeffer reconcile all this into practical advice? It sounds complicated.
It is nuanced.
Yeah.
His specific conclusion is this. A Christian is free to remarry only if two conditions are met. First, the non-Christian spouse initiates and obtains the divorce from the Christian.
Okay, the non-Christian has to be the one ending it legally.
Yes. And second, that non-Christian spouse then marries someone else.
Wow, that's very specific. Only after the non-Christian ex remarries.
That's his interpretation. He argues that until that second marriage happens, there's technically always a chance of reconciliation, however slim.
And he connects this to Deuteronomy.
Briefly, yeah. He mentions Deuteronomy 24, which had rules about not taking back a wife if she had married someone else in the interim. It underscores a kind of finality once a new marriage occurs.
Okay.
And to really drive home the commitment aspect, even in difficult marriages, he uses this powerful swimming analogy.
Oh, yeah?
He says getting married is like launching off the diving platform in a race. Once you're in the water, there's only one way to go, and that is toward the finish line.
You can't just climb back out.
Right. You must finish even if you try not to compete. You might tread water for a while, he says, but eventually you'll either finish the race or you'll drown. It's a stark image of endurance.
It really hammers home that one flesh idea again. Even if married to a non-Christian, that bond exists. You have to, as Paul says, finish what you started.
And Schaeffer adds that your perseverance might even be what influences your non-Christian spouse towards faith, referencing 1 Corinthians 7.1 scene again.
How do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband?
Yeah. He wraps up this part emphasizing teamwork again. Like building a house or playing football, marriage takes two, working together, even if it's hard. And he believes God provides the spiritual ability to make it work, especially if the non-Christian wants to stay. If they want to leave, the Christian is called to peace and should allow it.
So bringing this all together, Isabella, what's the main takeaway from Schaeffer's sermon?
I think his overarching message is pretty clear. The mechanics of divorce itself might seem straightforward on paper, but preaching the preservation of marriage, actively arguing against divorce as an easy option, is absolutely vital, especially in a culture that often suggests it's fine, maybe even good.
Yeah, that cultural contrast is stark.
And he gives the stern warning, really directed at pastors. If they aren't teaching that divorce isn't an option for Christian couples, outside specific exceptions, and never a decision a Christian should initiate with an unbeliever, then they're essentially giving, in his words, Satan the opportunity to dissolve those marriages.
Which then impacts the whole church community.
Exactly. Relationships within the church suffer too.
So that leaves us with our final thought for you, the listener. Schaeffer issues this call for pastors to essentially grieve over sin, become passionate over marriage, preach the whole counsel of God, and make a difference in the divorce rate.
It's intense.
It really is. So as you think about this deep dive, maybe consider how this intense focus on commitment, on spiritual foundation, might resonate with your own view of partnerships, whether personal or even professional. How could that finishing the race mentality, that dedication, even through difficulty, reshape how we approach long-term commitments in all parts of our lives? Something to think about.
So I want to clarify a couple things. So that divorce rate among Christians, there's been some conjecture that it may not have been focused on committed Christians, because you can ask a question whether a person's a Christian and they'll say yes, but whether they're really a committed Christian, by that I mean goes to church, reads their Bible regularly, like maybe daily, pray, maybe the spouses praying together. I would think that if with those requirements there, that I would think that a divorce would be very uncommon among a committed Christian. And but my experience, and this is in the last 10 years, and I'm in New England, so this is a completely different depending on your region, I believe. But my experience is that when I'm at a church, I see a lot of people that are either single or their spouse doesn't come with them to church. There's a lot of single adults, or not necessarily single as far as being married or not, but there's a lot of adults without a spouse, partner, whatever, at church. So I'm not exactly sure how that breaks out, whether what percentage are divorced, what percentage their spouses aren't attending church, what percentage does their spouse work during that time that are not allowed to come to church, what percentage the spouse may actually attend a different denomination or a different church. So that's something to keep in mind. And then I think with the issue about abuse and counseling, and I think you have to be very careful regarding recommending a couple to get back together, and there still be possibility for abuse. So I think there's some liability there that you really have to really be careful about that. And also there is some dispute about the idea of divorce and remarried. I take that from the passage says that you are not under bondage. The Christian is not under bondage if the non-Christian leaves. That same word, at least the same root word, is at the end of that chapter, and it says that the widow is not under bondage if her spouse dies. And it specifically says in that passage, that verse, that they can remarry. So since it's saying the same word, I'm taking it that if the non-Christian leaves, that they're free to marry based on the wording there. But I also say that they should not remarry until the non-believer remarries, because until you get to that point, there's always a chance of reconciliation. So if you have any questions, you can email me. My email is marriagemissionary@gmail.com. Again, marriagemissionary, of course, no spaces, @gmail.com. Thank you so much for your time.